You're listening to the Doctors In podcast from martinclinic.com. Although we share a lot of practical and, in our opinion, awesome information, what you hear on this podcast is not intended to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent any disease. It's strictly for informational purposes. So enjoy. Hi, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctors In podcast, and this is episode 170. Now, today we're going to continue to talk about what we talked about last week. So last week, we started with the premise that what you do in your 40s and 50s and 60s determines the health of your brain in your 70s and 80s. Because statistically, once you're 85 years old, 50% of the people at 85 have Alzheimer's. It's a coin flip, right? So how do you end up on that? What side of the coin is really decided what you do in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. So in last week's episode, if you haven't heard it, go back and listen to last week's episode because we really lay the foundation and we talk about the first 3 midlife brain killers. So we have 6 things that happen in your midlife that will kill your brain when you're older, right? That's what we're talking about. Now, we also talked about last week. So at the end of the day, if you were to reverse engineer Alzheimer's and dementia, there are 4 big causes of Alzheimer's and dementia. 4 big causes. Now, they're going to say genetics and all those kind of things, but they're not, in my opinion, one of the big causes of Alzheimer's dementia. So we talked about brain shrinking, right? Last week we talked a lot about the fact that it's normal. As you age, it's normal that your brain shrinks. But when it shrinks too fast, and there's a lot of reasons why your brain can shrink too fast. But when it does, you're going to end up with Alzheimer's dementia. Inflammation, massive cause of Alzheimer's dementia. And there are a lot of things that can cause inflammation. And then we talk about infection. That's a new one. You and I have been talking about leaky gut, leaky brain for a long time. But research is starting to catch up. And, you know, we talked a few episodes ago about the study showing how candida can actually cross the blood-brain barrier, and these researchers are starting to look at the fact that that might be a major cause of Alzheimer's dementia and Parkinson's in people. In fact, Harvard has started what they call the Brain Microbiome Project. They're looking at the brain actually has its own microbiome. The brain isn't sterile, let's just say that. That's the third thing. And then, of course, insulin. High insulin can cause, well, in fact, I read something saying about half the people with Alzheimer's
type 3 diabetes
is due to elevated insulin. Yeah. So 50% of the people with Alzheimer's is because they have a problem with high circulating insulin, right? So that's what we talked about last week. And then we mentioned that there are 6 brain killers that happen. So in your 40s and 50s and early 60s, if you do these 6 things or any of them or multiple of them, you're going to end up with, we can't say that for sure, but there's a good chance you're going to end up with Alzheimer's dementia. So last week, we talked about muscle mass. Studies are showing this again. We talked about muscle mass. We talked about muscle strength. And we talked about high blood pressure. And we also talked about research is showing that even if you have normal blood pressure that might be a little higher, but it's not diagnosed as high blood pressure, your chance of getting Alzheimer's increases. So that was last week. All right. So this week, we're going to finish off with the other 3 brain killers, and then we'll end it by talking about how to protect your brain, what you can do to protect your brain. All right. So let's start off with the big one, which is inflammation, right? And specifically, again, remember, we know, and we've talked about this before, that inflammation causes Alzheimer's dementia for a lot of people. But what we want to do is, we're talking about midlife. Research is clear on this as well. Midlife inflammation is associated with late life brain volume. So one of the things that happens is if you have inflammation in your 40s and 50s in your brain, not in your brain, sorry. These are systemic inflammatory markers. So high CRP, just high inflammation. In midlife, your brain shrinks faster, which is a big problem. So midlife inflammation is a big time indicator of brain volume later in life. Now, you know what's interesting? It used to be, and I remember reading a study a while ago, and they looked at the causes of brain shrinkage. Because our brains shrink when we age, that's normal, but excessive brain shrinkage. And it used to be this. So smoking, because shrinks your brain faster.
Microcirculation.
Yep. It affects the brain volume.
Yeah.
Yet, I mean, it used to be if you smoke, not only all the other things that happen and you're going to age faster on the outside and all the free radical damage, your brain volume shrinks. That was one. High blood pressure, we talked specifically now about midlife high blood pressure. Obesity. Studies have shown that someone is obese has a smaller brain than somebody who's not. We now know a lot of reasons why that is, right? But those were the big things that they associated with a smaller brain volume. Now there's a lot more things. Even midlife inflammation shrinks your brain faster. So midlife inflammation. Now, we've already talked about this before. Last episode, we kind of led off by talking about how you look in your 40s and 50s is determined by your 20s and 30s. So a person who smokes or drinks too much or doesn't exercise, they eat a lot of junk, a lot of vegetable oils, they age faster.
And it shows up faster.
So you have somebody who's late 40s and somebody can't guess their age because they look like they could really be late 50s. And then vice versa. People are surprised when somebody says, oh, you're 47 or whatever. You don't look anything close to that, right? A lot of that is 20s and 30s. It really comes back and bites you in your late 40s and 50s. But here's the thing. Chronic inflammation, so midlife chronic inflammation, they have shown not only does it shrink your brain faster, it is also, there was a big study done back in 2016, and they've called it infla-aging, because chronic inflammation is the accelerator of biological aging. Now, what does that mean? That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Well, there's a difference between chronological aging and biological aging. Now, we can't do anything about chronological aging. Every year we get older, right? Every year you get older. You have so many birthdays in your lifetime. There's nothing you can do about that. That's chronological aging. So you have no control over your age. Mind you, people are identifying as I saw that one thing as a senior wanted to identify as a 40-year-old. But you can't do anything about your birthdays. However, biological aging is different because biological aging is the actual age of your cells, how old your cells are. And some people, their insides are way older than their outside, their age, and then the other way around. Sometimes they may be 60, but they got a biological age of 40 because their metabolic health is so healthy, right? Nothing ages you faster on the inside than inflammation. A study was done, and actually it's interesting, they called it inflammaging. So inflammaging, inflammation ages. So this is what they found specifically. Not only does inflammation in midlife significantly raise your risk of morbidity and mortality, it also increases mitochondrial dysfunction. And I'll tell you, mitochondria, which are the little battery packs of your cells, mitochondrial health really determines your energy levels. Yeah. You and I think that cancer is a disease of mitochondria, right? It's a metabolic disorder. Yeah. So again, your mitochondria, immune system, hormones, dysfunction of your telomeres. Now, telomeres are interesting because I always tell people what telomeres, it's kind of like the wick of a candle. And so the longer your telomeres are,
the longer you last,
the longer you're going to live. Yeah. Shorter telomeres are associated with shorter lifespans. So you want long telomeres, right? So again, inflammation shortens telomeres. So again, also plays a key role. And this is all the study. They looked at all, it's very interesting. Type 2 diabetes. Of course, we're talking about Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, sarcopenia,
muscles,
osteoporosis, and cancer. Basically all the top killers. If you want to get those top killers, have midlife inflammation. Inflammation at any time is bad news, but there's something especially bad about being highly inflamed in your midlife. Yeah. It's going to kill your heart or your brain or your immune system. It's going to give you cancer,
autoimmune
disorders, kill your hormones, right? So inflammation in midlife kills your brain. So it's a brain killer. That's the fourth thing. Now let's talk about the fifth one, insulin resistance. You and I talk every time about insulin because it's involved in everything. So when a person has high circulating insulin, they are at risk for a whole bunch of things in their brain. It does a lot of things. First of all, and again, we're talking midlife here. So I got a couple studies here talking about if you in your midlife have elevated insulin or insulin resistance, they've shown late life brain amyloid plaque accumulation. There's a correlation between the two. So think about that for a second.
Yeah.
One of the distinguishing factors of Alzheimer's is the plaquing, right? They used to think that plaquing caused Alzheimer's, but there's what causes the plaquing? I mean, there's, you can go all the way down backwards, but they're finding out that if you have insulin resistance, so think of the diabetics, the metabolic syndromes, the pre-diabetes, all these people, if they have that in their midlife, they're going to have plaquing in the brain later on.
You wonder if that doesn't get started early and they just never look at it. They just really don't see it.
Well, because if you're a diabetic,
like
you're not
scar
getting an
tissue,
MRI
right?
of your brain.
Yeah.
But you're putting it there.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Your brain is paying the price.
It's like old injuries that you get. You hurt your knee playing ball and as a 20-year-old and 40-year-old, you still got, now that really comes back to bite you when your knee, you can hardly go upstairs and you got your bone on bone and scar tissue's developed. And same thing in the brain, right? That stuff that the inflammation injures, right? It injures it over a period of time.
Yeah, it scars it up.
Scars it up.
Yeah, battle wounds.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. And the interesting thing is, again, midlife insulin resistance increases brain amyloid plaquing later in life. So that's one thing insulin does. However, insulin also increases brain inflammation, and we just talked about the effect it has. So it's a double whammy, but it's actually a triple whammy because studies have shown this, and I found this interesting. High circulating insulin is associated with a shrinking of your brain, but specifically the area of your brain that's associated with memories.
Yeah.
So insulin causes plaquing. Insulin increases inflammation, and inflammation in midlife shrinks your brain. And insulin specifically causes an area of your brain to shrink that's associated with memory. So it's a triple threat for your brain.
Yeah.
Which is why, I mean, it's not only your brain. We talk about insulin so much because it does.
People say, don't you get tired of insulin? But, every time you eat, you need insulin.
We get questions about insulin every day.
Insulin, I know, but we've got degrees in nutrition. I mean, we got to talk about food because, you are what you eat, you are what you absorb. And insulin, I know it sounds, but it really is, it's not that complicated. Right? It's not that complicated. If you're a bad eater, sugar's the new poison, sugar's the new smoking, right? Like we talked about, especially in the last podcast, everybody in their dog knows that smoking's no good for you. You don't have to go to a doctor to say, oh, yeah, you know what? I want you to have a couple of cigarettes every day. It's good for you. No, like all doctors know, anybody knows that smoking, no, it's not good for you. And this is pet peeve. Like, I didn't understand this whole marijuana thing. Because they want people, they're talking about legalizing, and then they want people smoking. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that bothers me. If for nothing else, forget the drug. It's just the smoking again. Like, we already went through that. Like, my dad in 1962, I remember, I'll never forget it. I remember the day he came home, and he said, I'm never going to smoke again. Throw cigarettes away. And Dad, what are you, crazy? What am I going to steal?
Well, I remember, it's funny because if you look back in the times of the world wars, if you had asthma, they had you smoke.
Well, you see, my dad.
Well, they think you're coughing it out.
He had an ashtray in every one of his offices, and his waiting room, his treatment rooms, his personal office. I grew up with that. It was nothing. My dad smoked.
Well, you know what I tell my kids is they don't have the privilege of eating a Tim Hortons donut without smoking it.
Yeah.
As a kid. It's a funny thing because, I used to get a kick out of this. The smoking section in restaurants, so you'd have a table They like, you're smoking or not smoking. You say not smoking, so they put you at a table, and then like 2 feet over to your left, the
they
person's
were
smoking. So the difference, like, there's a magic air barrier that stops the smoking section. And it's funny because we're so sensitive to smoke now because I never have to smell smoke anymore. So when I do, it's overpowering. It's amazing how that used to be so much more common in restaurants, and people used to smoke on an airplane. I mean, it's such a funny thing. But you're right. I mean, smoking, they've shown it, and that's the number one public health thing that they did was cutting smoking, cut a lot of diseases out, right? Yeah. Now we're back to a whole bunch of different things. But so smoking will definitely shrink your brain. But insulin, like you said, cutting insulin like smoking will cut a lot of risk factors down. Yeah. But insulin definitely affects your brain. Now, all right, here's the third thing, and it's along the same lines, and it has to do with your blood glucose levels, right? So here's the thing. And again, we're talking about midlife. So midlife diabetes, let's talk about that first. Midlife diabetes. If you are in your 40s and 50s, and even 60s, according to the study, and you have diabetes, your risk of getting Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, they call it, goes up through the roof. And this risk, and this is interesting, this is the study here, the risk is stronger when diabetes occurs at midlife than in late life. Yeah. So if you get diabetes and you're listening and you have type 2 diabetes, your 50s, 60s, your brain's at risk big time. If anything, you have to protect your brain and drastically change some things. But that's what this study. So there's a stronger association if you get it in your midlife. Because again, there's something special about that midlife for brain health, right? It really sets it up. But here's what I want to talk about specifically. Because not everybody's a diabetic. If you're a diabetic, your brain's at risk. That's a fact. But a lot of people don't realize this. Even if your blood glucose is normal, and there's been a few studies about this, high normal blood glucose is associated with two things: decreased brain volume and cognitive performance in your 60s. So if you have your blood sugar is normal, not considered normal. It's not normal.
It's not normal.
But it's elevated, but not enough to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So, your doctor says, you got a little pre-diabetes, your blood sugar is a little elevated, it's a little off, but we'll monitor it and we'll pay attention. And when it becomes a problem, then we'll treat it with drugs. So if you got high normal blood sugar, your brain is shrinking faster. Yeah. Think about it this way. As your blood glucose levels rise, your brain shrinks. And if it's high all the time, even normal high, your brain's shrinking. And then not only does it affect set you up for dementia, Alzheimer's, it also affects your cognitive performance in your 60s. In your 60s, when you start to all of a sudden, like, your cognition goes down, well, blood glucose has a lot to do with that. The brain is we talked about this previously, but the brain is an energy hog.
Takes up 20-something%?
Yeah, it's a few percentage of your body weight in total, but it takes up almost a quarter of your energy. It needs a lot of energy. And when your blood glucose is messed up, your brain shrinks faster. I mean, it makes sense because it's almost like the brain has to shrink in volume because it can't get the flow it needs, the energy it needs for full brain volume, so it shrinks in size. And I mean, that's not a scientific explanation, but that's kind of what's happening, right? And what's interesting is this study was done, I'm looking at one study here on brain and normal blood glucose. This one was done back in 2013. And even back then, I'm just going to read you what the authors, the researchers suggested. They say these findings here stress the need to reevaluate what is considered as healthy blood glucose levels and consider the role of higher normal blood glucose and the risk factor for cerebral health, cognitive function, and dementia. So they're even saying we should maybe tighten up what we consider normal. And here's the dirty little trick, a dirty little secret of medicine in general when it comes to lab values. So the way it works is normal is what 95% of the population has. Then 2.5% is above and 2.5% below. So what take 100 people, and what 95% of them fall into what range, and then 2.5% is high, 2.5% is low. That's how it determines. So as we get sicker, normal shifts, because you can have 100 people and a majority of them are not healthy, but they affect what is viewed as normal, which is why, for example, the testosterone range is like, 200 to 1100? Because 95% of the males fit into that range.
Yeah.
That's a big range. It should be a lot tighter than that. Glucose is the same way in a sense. Glucose range should be a lot tighter because we're not meant to have a wild variety and elevated normal blood sugar levels. So what I'm saying is this, bottom line is that high normal is not normal because they've shown that even when it comes to your brain shrinks faster and it affects your brain later in life.
And that's what Dr. Kraft used to say too, right? I mean, he was the guru of all gurus, and he said, like, we got it all wrong because he said most people never get the diagnosis of diabetes, but they're a diabetic already because they're in that high normal sugar, right? It's normal, but he said it's already diabetes because your body is already paying a price for that elevated glucose. And, like we talk about this, your body does everything in the universe it can to get sugar out of your bloodstream. So don't wait, folks, till you're a diabetic. Don't wait for a doctor to say, you're a diabetic. Now here you go. Here's some pills. Like, treat yourself as a diabetic and say, look, if I'm eating too much sugar, if I'm eating too many crappy carbohydrates and that, like, you're a diabetic already. Just take it, face the facts. And don't negotiate with yourself. Be hard on yourself to some extent because we're talking about this is life and death stuff. Like,
well, and this is how you enjoy your retirement.
This is how you, like, you know what I mean? You can make I always tell people in the office, you can make a huge investment in your
what makes
portfolio in terms of money, and good for you, and I'm not against that.
And you and I have talked about this in the previous episode. That's what makes this difficult because it's almost like talking to a 19-year-old about retiring, saving for retiring. They're like, man, come on. Yeah. Really? I'm 19. That's like a million years from now. Yeah. I don't want to talk about saving. It's so hard. But I'll tell you, you talk to somebody who's close to retirement, they wish they can go back and talk to their young self.
Yeah.
The brain and your muscles specifically, your brain and muscles work like that.
Yeah.
What you do when you're young determines your muscle health, which is your sarcopenia and osteoporosis, the leading cause of disability in its seniors, muscle wasting, and then brain.
Yeah.
But again, it's hard because who's thinking of their brain at 75, 80 when they're 45 and they got high blood pressure and they got inflammation and their sugar levels are a little bit elevated but not enough to be diabetic, and they're not going to the gym, they got weak muscles, they don't got a lot of muscle mass, and then they're in that statistic, they're going to be that 50% at 85 that has dementia, Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And people are going to be like, I don't know what happened.
Yeah. But you want a brain, and, like I'll tell you, one of the biggest fears there are for people, and it's getting younger and younger because I think people are much more, with social media and the internet and all this and that, people do talk about the importance of their brain health. We love that. I mean, this is like choices give you power. They give you, like, it's better. Like I say, they have a heads up.
Well, I'm 45 years old, and I'm starting now to think more seriously about my brain health. Mm-hmm. Like I'm 45, and I'm starting. I one of the downside of reading all these studies is a lot of these studies are warning me at my age not to have these things so I'm starting to think about my brain health a lot more than I used to. I'll tell you, I never thought about my brain health in my 30s, ever. Unless I had a concussion, that's the only time I worried about brain health. I never worried about dementia, Alzheimer's. I'm 45. I'm starting to think about that more often. I'm starting to can't forget, I got to take my DHA every day, right? I got to make sure I take my curcumin. I got to make sure I take my pine bark. I got to make sure. We even created a nootropic, our enhanced formula, specifically for 40-plus-year-olds. We built that for ourselves. You're right? I looked at.
You got to be sharp.
Yeah.
Man.
So, but it's amazing. But here's the bottom line. If you're listening and you're in your midlife and you have those things, especially multiple of those things, then you want to fix them. You want to get on it. You want to fix them now. Then your chances of getting dementia, Alzheimer's decrease drastically. Now, we can't 100% say you're not going to get it, but if those 6 risk factors are not there, your brain's going to be pretty healthy, and a lot of other parts of it as well. All right, now we're out of time. So what can you do to protect your brain? Now, you and I, we have a video on our website. It was a webinar that you and I did. You can get it for free on our website. It's called Age Proof Your Brain. We reverse engineer dementia, Alzheimer's, talk about all these things we've talked about, and then we give you practical nutrition and then also nutrients, supplements that we recommend in our clinic for brain health. So go to our website, martinclinic.com, and you can sign up, you can watch a video for free, and it has all the information that we have in our clinic that we openly share with people, right? And they could do with it what they want. Now, again, we're not telling you that it's going to replace your doctor. We're not saying that. It's just, it's for informational purposes, but there's a lot of good information in there.
Good education.
So you can go to our website and you can get that there. So again, we want to thank you for listening to this 2-part series, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Doctor is In podcast from martinclinic.com. If you have any questions, you can reach us at info@martinclinic.com. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, you can head to our website and sign up for free. We also have a private Facebook group that you can join. It's a community of awesome people. Finally, I do a Facebook Live every Thursday morning at 8:30. Join us again next week for a new episode.